It's that time of the year again, where we've got yet another quote-unquote new iteration of Train Sim World, and just like last year with TSW4, I think there aren't enough major improvements to justify a whole new iteration of the game. My thoughts on the weak justifications for annual releases aside, I thought I'd start this era by reviewing the West Coast Mainline London Euston to Milton Keynes route. There was a lot of criticism/concern surrounding this route between DTG's preview livestream and TSW5's launch, and from what I saw and heard, I thought it looked set to be the British equivalent of New York to Trenton. To an extent, I was proven wrong, but the route sure as hell is not without issues. But we're off to a bad start if the route length is anything to go by, because it's only around 49 3/4 miles long. I shouldn't have to clarify this, but I would not expect Dovetail to do the entire WCML from London to Glasgow. At the very least, they should have extended the route coverage up to Rugby, including the Northampton Loop, and going to Rugby via Northampton would have made the route a more reasonable 84.6 miles long, and you would also be able to run freight trains to and from the huge container terminal at Daventry. And don't even get me started on the lack of the branch line from Watford Junction to St Albans Abbey. It's only 6.5 miles long, so surely it wouldn't have been that much extra time and effort to add it to the TSW route. This situation reminds me of how Dovetail, for some reason, left the Sheerness branch off of South Eastern High Speed. As an aside, this is yet another London area route in TSW, and I think that makes 6 of them now. Curiously, despite the relatively large number of UK routes we've got in TSW so far, there are still several parts of the country that have never appeared in the game. Examples of such counties include Devon, Norfolk, Suffolk, Oxfordshire, Dorset, and most of Essex. Most British routes either generally involve London or somewhere up north, with exceptions in Sussex, Kent, the Midlands, and Scotland. There was also that one route set in Cornwall, but it's a Rivet Games product. Need I say more? As for the rolling stock that comes with WCML South, we get one electric multiple unit that's new to TSW, an overused diesel locomotive in what barely counts as a new livery, and 2 more EMUs that were reused or modified from previous DLC. That new EMU is the Class 350/1 in an unbranded London North Western Railway livery. Someone from Dovetail said in a forum post that they're, quote, hopeful of reintroducing the branding at some point in the future, unquote, but I'm not holding my breath over that. I don't mind the Desiro family. Indeed, I'm a bit partial to the Class 360, but I'm annoyed at the presence of only one 350 variant in TSW. I don't see any good reason why the 350/2, 350/3, and 350/4 should have been omitted. The other motive power included in the route is the Class 66 diesel locomotive in DB Cargo UK colours, the Class 377/2 Electrostar in Southern colours, modified from the existing 377/4 model that comes with East Coastway and London Commuter, and then the London Underground 1972 tube stock. Of course, this unit is reused from the Bakerloo line add-on, but it makes sense to be included with a WCML add-on, because the Bakerloo line mostly runs parallel to the WCML between Queen's Park and its northern terminus at Harrow and Wealdstone. Personally, I don't bother driving the 72 stock on the WCML version, because I like to be able to continue past Queen's Park and down into the underground section to Elephant and Castle. but at least bundling the 72 stock with the WCML route means that people wouldn't need to buy the Bakerloo line if they don't want to. As for the Class 66, she just exists, like seasons 8 through 12 of Thomas the Tank Engine. At this point, I've lost count of how many times this locomotive has been recycled and resold in a route or gameplay pack. DB Cargo UK Red is touted as being a new livery, and while that's technically true, it looks borderline identical to the DB Schenker livery that comes with Great Western Express. The only differences I've noticed are the logos on each side, and the slightly different shade of red on the DB Cargo UK version. Unfortunately, no new freight wagons are included alongside the 66 in WCML South. You only get the same old FKA container flats that we've already had in Great Western Express and ECML Peterborough to Doncaster. The Class 350 is essentially the overhead wires AC equivalent of the Class 450, a unit that runs in southwest England. 87 examples of this class were built between 2004 and 2014, with the 30-strong 350-1 subclass having been built in 2004 and 2005. They originally served with Silverlink and Central trains, but later London Midland, and now London North Western Railway. Unlike the later 3 variants, the 350-1 is dual voltage, but that functionality is somewhat useless these days because the units only ever run under the wires. In any case, the Class 350 is the third British Desiro to come to Train Sim World, following the Class 700 and Class 380. I should also mention that the WCML add-on features the London Overground's Watford DC line in its entirety. This line runs for 17.5 miles from London Euston to Watford Junction, running parallel to the WCML for almost its entire length, and of course, sharing part of its route with the Bakerloo line. However, the Class 710 Aventra is not included in the WCML route itself, and you'll need to own the Gospel Oak to Barking Riverside route add-on for the Overground trains to appear on the Watford DC line. Although the 4-car 710-2 variant does run on this line in real life, it would still have been nice to see the 5-car 710-3 variants brought to the game as well. The 4-car 710-1 variant, on the other hand, wouldn't make sense for this line as she is AC only instead of dual voltage. As much as I like the London Overground, I still thought that driving on the Watford DC line was a very boring experience, and it didn't help that there weren't enough 710s present. More on that later. Of course, the Class 390 Pendolino has come to TSW as well, but the trouble is, this unit is sold separately instead of being included in the base route. Initially, she was exclusive to the deluxe and special editions of TSW5 in the pre-order phase, and it's as if Dovetail only made the 390 a separate purchase so that they could nickel and dime the players yet again. I find this more aggravating than usual because, even though the 390 is technically an optional purchase, it comes across more like a mandatory purchase because you simply cannot have a modern image WCML rail scene without the Class 390. On the plus side, you do get both the 9-car Class 390-0 and 11-car Class 390-1 variants. As for the sounds, some of them are apparently synthesized because Dovetail couldn't record all of them from a real 390. As I'm not familiar with the real units, I can't verify the accuracy of the in-game sounds, regardless of whether they were real recordings or not.
Security personnel tour this station 24 hours a day.
No special interest liveries are included in the base Class 390 add-on, only the standard Avanti West Coast livery. On some units in real life, only the driving coaches have the full livery, while the intermediate coaches are in plain white with grey doors. For whatever reason, that version of the livery is nowhere to be seen in TSW. It only takes around 30 to 35 minutes for the Class 390 to cover the London to Milton Keynes section, all the more reason why Dovetail should have built the route coverage further north. Faster trains, such as the Class 390, Class 43 HST, and a TGV duplex, really need decently long routes, so as to be able to run at speed for a reasonably long time, without looking and feeling like caged animals. As much as I dislike the Kassel to Würzburg line for its boring terrain, at least that route lets you run the Ice 1 and Ice 3 at those higher speeds for much longer than what you can do with the Class 390, HST, and a TGV duplex. The Class 390 also has an AI-only timetable mode layer at Glasgow Central on the remastered Cathcart Circle route. This is a welcome improvement to the realism at this station, but for whatever reason, the 390 does not layer into Birmingham New Street or Manchester Piccadilly, on the Cross City Line and Glossop Line routes respectively, and the Class 350 doesn't appear at New Street either. As a result, this station still looks like a ghost town, with the only trains present being the Class 323 EMUs. It's mostly the same story for Manchester Piccadilly, albeit with more 323s present at a time than what you'll see at New Street, and occasional appearances from the Class 158 Sprinter and Class 43 HST in East Midlands Trains colours. Timetable mode is not as busy as I was expecting. The full timetable for the PC and 9th Gen console versions features 244 playable services for the Class 350/1, 36 for the Class 377/2, 38 for the Class 66, 198 for the 1972 tube stock, 49 for the 9-car Class 390, 60 for the 11-car Class 390, and only a pathetic 65 for the Class 710 layered in from the Goblin line. Services for the Class 66, Class 377/2, Class 710 and 1972 tube stock were cut from timetable mode on the PS4 and Xbox One versions, presumably due to memory limitations on those older consoles. This begs the question as to why DTG hasn't dropped support for the older consoles at this point. It takes between 38 and 78 minutes for the Class 350 to complete the run from London Euston to Milton Keynes Central, depending on her stopping pattern. Some LNWR services terminate at Tring, while others terminate at Milton Keynes Central or continue off the map to Crewe or Birmingham New Street. I soon got bored of only seeing 350/1s every time a 350 showed up, and I wonder if DTG had to use more of them than actually exist to pull off this timetable. In any case, I enjoyed driving the Class 350, at least on my first run from London Euston to Tring, but she's hardly the greatest train ever brought to TSW. Like so many others in this game, especially on the British scene, the 350 is a simple EMU with a combined throttle and brake lever. I refer to units with this setup as one-handle units. Dovetail were hyping up the new suspension physics in TSW4 for a while, but if memory serves, these weren't actually added to the game until we were less than a month away from TSW5's release. For whatever reason, the Class 350 doesn't even have the new suspension physics at launch, thus making this situation even more laughable. As for the Class 350's sounds, these are perfectly fine as far as I'm concerned, although the audio for the horn is reused from the Class 380, and that probably goes for the motor sounds as well. In real life, services on the Watford DC line run every 15 minutes in each direction throughout the day, as is also the case on the Gospel Oak to Barking Riverside line. For some reason, the issue of unrealistically long gaps in the in-game London Overground timetable, an issue that should never have existed in the first place, is still here in the supposedly finished product, and it doesn't look like this will be fixed anytime soon. Dovetail's gonna dovetail, I guess. Apparently, the 710 should have around 44 playable services on this route, not 65. The Class 377-2's services are only playable between Wembley Central and Watford Junction. They used to go all the way to Milton Keynes, but in May 2022, the service was cut back to terminate at Watford Junction. This means that, in TSW, you can only drive the 377-2 for around 12 or 13 minutes at a time, with only one intermediate stop at Harrow and Wealdstone. As for what the southern service does south of Wembley Central, it goes through the Willesden area before branching off to the West London line, switching to third rail DC power, and eventually terminating at East Croydon. Annoyingly, the Class 377-2 does not layer onto the London commuter and East Coastway routes. In both cases, you'll still only be seeing the third rail DC only 377-4 whenever a 377 shows up, despite the through service to the WCML being represented in London commuters' timetable mode. Prior to TSW 5, there were only two scenarios in the entire game when you could play as a guard. One was on the Glossop line, and the other was on the extended Long Island Railroad. Dovetail brought a proper guard/conductor mode to TSW 5, but it's being touted as a new feature even though it technically isn't. Regardless, it works with the Class 350, so I thought I would try it at least once for this review on a non-stop run from London Euston to Milton Keynes. Weirdly, most of the coaches were completely empty after departing Euston, and all the passengers who needed their tickets checked were in the very last coach. Surely a real Euston to Crewe service wouldn't be anywhere near this quiet. And despite the service being listed as going to Crewe, the scrolling screens incorrectly listed Milton Keynes as the destination. My first impression of guard mode was one of disappointment, although that could partially be because I chose a service with no intermediate stops. After checking the tickets and clearing bags from the centre aisle in that one coach, there was nothing to do for the rest of the journey, apart from opening and closing the doors again at Milton Keynes. On my end, with the max frame rate set at 130 FPS, this route's performance was pretty average. The frame rate went down to around 30 to 40 FPS, sometimes even worse than that, between Wembley Central and London Euston, with an average of 60 to 70 for most of the route, but the occasional stuttering didn't help matters. Even though 70 FPS isn't bad by any means, other routes in my collection generally pull higher frame rates, although that's probably due to the lower amount of trains present, especially in the case of the Niedertalbahn. With TSW5's new route hopping feature, you can easily switch from the WCML to the Bakerloo line at any station between Queen's Park and Harrow and Wealdstone without having to go back to the main menu. I tried the route hopping at Harrow and Wealdstone, but there are invisible walls on the Bakerloo version that prevent you from getting back over to platform 5, where the route hopping marker is located on the WCML version, and I couldn't find the marker anywhere else on the Bakerloo version. I couldn't see any route hopping markers at Queen's Park either. Numerous stations on this route feature working lifts, a feature that we've previously seen on Gospel Oak to Barking Riverside. WCML stations with working lifts include, but are not limited to, Milton Keynes Central, Bletchley, Tring, Berkhamsted, Hemel Hempstead, and Watford Junction. But not every station has working lifts. Take Harrow and Wealdstone for example, whose station model is reused from the old Bakerloo Line DLC of 2020, and is now looking noticeably dated compared to the newer station models. London Euston looks fine where the modelling is concerned, but there's something off with the lighting, and in terms of rail activity, this station is way too quiet for a major London terminus. Considering just how busy London Victoria is on TSW's London commuter route, it's bizarre, and actually somewhat disappointing, to see so few trains at Euston by comparison. Elsewhere in the station, I was surprised to see that you can actually walk up the ramps from the platforms and right to the main concourse, although the details up here are fairly basic. And there's also an invisible wall that prevents you from walking too far away from the ramps. A bizarre little detail that I noticed was this NPC sitting in an office at Watford Junction and holding a sandwich. He even lifts the sandwich up to his mouth and tries to take a bite, but nothing happens to the sandwich. On the subject of NPCs, I saw them glitching through this flight of stairs at Bushy Station. There was another one in the ticket office at South Hempstead looking at his phone instead of helping the passengers. And then this absolute muppet was struggling to disembark from a Class 350 at Milton Keynes. Other issues that I found throughout the route include, but are not limited to, the complete lack of functioning neutral sections, this bit of missing OHLE near the Billet Lane overbridge in Berkhamsted, the contact signaller device sunk into platform 11 at Watford Junction, this guy glitched into platform 5 at London Euston, another NPC stuck on platform 6 at Harrow and Wealdstone, yet another case of NPCs stuck on a platform, elsewhere in Euston this time, then this staircase at Bletchley, through which you can actually fall, for some reason, and Class 390s spawning the wrong way round, for whatever reason. First class is supposed to be at the London end, not the country end. Lastly, there was an annoying glitch that appeared during early access. The clock in the bottom right corner normally disappears with the rest of the heads-up display, toggled on and off by pressing the F1 key. But there were several times where, for whatever reason, the clock would not disappear with the rest of the HUD, and it ruined screenshots as a result. This glitch is still in the game after the full launch, but there is a workaround where you can press Ctrl 5 to get rid of the clock. At the end of the day, I find the experience on Dovetail's West Coast Mainline South route in TSW 5 to be tolerable at best and boring at worst. My main issues with this add-on are A. The route coverage only going as far as Milton Keynes, B. The Class 390 being sold separately, C. The timetable being too Spartan, especially where the London Overground is concerned, D. The lack of the other three Class 350 variants, E. No St Albans Abbey branch, and F. Inconsistent frame rates. There was a post on the Dovetail Live forums that talked about making numerous post-release improvements to the WCML, and that's all well and good, but the planned improvements should have been made before the route was released. Something tells me that the route was rushed through development to meet a release deadline. And if that's the case, it certainly wouldn't be the first time Dovetail have done that sort of thing. Considering just how expensive the DLC is these days, we, as paying customers, have every right to expect consistently high quality and good value for money, and should also call out the developers when they under-deliver on their promises. I swear, Dovetail keeps taking L after L after L, although that's not to say that they never get a W. The latter is just a very rare occurrence. Although I'm rather annoyed at Dovetail and some third-party developers for still giving us subpar, or just generally inconsistent, DLC quality for TSW after 7 years of the game's existence, I still try to enjoy TSW for what it is. In the case of the London to Milton Keynes route, while it's nowhere near as bad as I thought it would be, it's still underwhelming for what I thought was one of Dovetail's flagship routes. If all goes according to plan, my next TSW 5 review should be about the remastered Cathcart Circle line and the Class 380, but that is not a guarantee.